Hey students, welcome to week 2 of Business 426, Production and Operations Management. Let's see, here's what we're going to be learning this week. These are our chapters 4, 5, and 6. We're going to look at the basic tenets of project management. We're going to learn about strategic capacity that you have either in a manufacturing plant or your organization. It includes service organizations too, so we'll cover that. And then we're also going to look at this thing called learning curves that are interesting. Learning curves happen in all kinds of organizations, every organization as a matter of fact, not just manufacturing plants, not just engineering organizations, and not just service organizations. Everyone goes through some sort of a learning curve that they can expect in their organization. So let's look at project management first. Like, what is a project? Really simply, it's a task. It's a network of connected tasks or activities, all like tied together. And I'll show you a real simple example here in a minute. But it's a series of related jobs directed towards some major completion of a project or some sort of an effort. Some of these projects are very small, very simple. Some of them are very complex. Imagine for a moment launching a rocket, for example. I've seen SpaceX launch a number of rockets the last few months. Imagine the project size for that compared to a simple project of frying an egg in the morning, for example. So projects cover a whole wide gamut of things. And why is it important? Because if you understand how projects are connected, or how activities are connected together, you also have a peek into the window about how to shorten the time it takes to complete a project. If you can shorten the time it takes to complete a project because you've studied how things are connected together, you can make more money because you can reduce your cost. And sometimes you can get things to market quicker that way too. Okay. A project is structured. There's 3 different major project structures. One's called a pure project, which is a self-contained team that works full-time on a project. So people are pulled out of their normal mode of working. They're put together in a team and they're set aside. That's called a pure project. That's all they do is work on that. There's functional projects where basically people work in their functional different areas, but then they're assigned to different projects to work on. And then there's a matrix project, which is a blend of both the pure and functional project. People from different functional areas work on the project, probably on a part-time basis, but could be on a full-time basis too. Pure project, some of the advantages of it: project managers have full authority to make sure the project gets done, which is pretty cool when you think about it. There's no split leadership. One of the disadvantages, though, is it can duplicate resources. So imagine almost like separate silos, like growing up in your company, each silo working on its own project with a lot of duplicate resources, people doing the same things but in different projects. Can be wasteful. A functional project, a little diagram down there, you can see that. Team members can work on several different projects at once, so their skills and abilities can be shared across multiple projects. But sometimes motivation of team members isn't what can be kind of weak because they're excited about some projects and not excited about other ones. So their enthusiasm can wane a little bit. The matrix project, like I said, is kind of a mix of both. Great communication between functional areas, and project managers are held responsible for successes. But the disadvantages in this kind of a structure, employees, people working on projects can have multiple bosses from each of those functional areas, each pulling on them. And guess what? Sometimes the loudest voice wins. So the manager has the most influence and the most pull might pull his own resources or her own resources to work on the projects that they think are important. So it can be a problem. So each of these different forms of project management has some advantages and disadvantages. Let's talk for a moment about this network that I'm talking about, all these activities connected together in a big network to complete a project. So it's called network planning. That's how it's done. There's a concept of the critical path. Let me get it there. You can probably see that. So the critical path is the path of activities through this network that take the longest to complete the project. It's called the critical path, and it provides a wide range of scheduling information. It's useful in managing a project. In fact, you really can't manage a project unless you know what the critical path is. It's the longest path through the network of activities from beginning to end to complete a project. So when you're thinking about the critical path method, and I want you to notice because one, it's on the quiz, but two, it's look at your activities at work through this critical path method lens, if you will, through this project management lens. You identify each activity that has to be done, estimate how long it's going to take, you determine the required sequence of these activities, you look at the critical path, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, and the book does a great job of doing this. And then you determine like the early start and early finish of each of these different activities so you understand how quick can your project really get done. For example, this is a real simple project network of two activities, A and B. I said, hey, activity A takes 3 days, activity B takes 5. The early start for activity A is obviously 0 day. On the 0 day, it would start because it's the first activity. But the earliest it could finish would be 3 days later. The earliest it could finish. Now, it could actually finish later if this activity is planned for 3, but it actually goes to 6 or 7 days. Early finish is out the door. Then you had kind of like a late finish date. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple. Early finish is really the result of adding the early start days to the activity days it's planned. It gives you early finish. Well, guess what? Activity B follows on from activity A. It can't start until this one finishes. So the earliest it can start is 3 days after the project starts. And the earliest it can finish is, in this case, 5 days after it starts, which is the early finish date of 8 days. So this particular simple project, whatever it would be, this is the critical path, and it could get, as soon as it can get done, is 8 days. So the way you build that network is, first activity, you always put the first activity to the far left. You identify early start, early finish. Again, the book goes into some more detail and some other metrics that you can look at. You identify the critical path, the path that takes the longest to get through that network. And you want to ask yourself, well, how soon will this project finish? That's kind of the question that the critical path answers. And as you look at networks, think about this question. What would you do to shorten the project time? If you can shorten the time, you can reduce the cost. If you can reduce the cost, as well as the time, sometimes you get it to market sooner, you can reduce the expenses in your own company. So here's an example. This has got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different, if I counted those right, 7 different activities, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And activity A takes 21 weeks in this case, so it's got 21 weeks to get it done. Activity C takes 7 weeks, etc. So you can see how somebody has already figured out that, activity F can't start until C and D are completed, and then F can take off. Well, let's look at it with those early starts, early finishes in mind in the critical path. There are actually 2 critical paths through here, A, C, F, and G, which takes 36 weeks to get from here to here, or path A, B, D, F, and G. A, B, D, F, and then G. Again, 36 weeks to get through there. That's the critical path. It takes 36 weeks at a minimum to work your way through here. Even though this is like a little bit shorter, this will actually get done sooner, and this activity will be done waiting. This activity can't start, though, until both are complete. So 36 weeks before this is done, 33 before that's done, and then this can take off and go. So that's the real brief review of the critical path. Again, there's some more in the text about that. Let's switch gears and talk about capacity management for just a moment. So capacity, at least in a business perspective, is viewed as the amount of output that a system can put out during a certain time period. Like how much product can be made, how much service can be delivered during a certain time period is the capacity question. Capacity time durations usually are fenced as either long range, intermediate range, or short range being a month, long range being greater than a year. So when you think about capacity, you always have to think, is this a long range question, intermediate, or short range question? And you have to know something about your facilities and your equipment and the labor force size. Do you have you have to answer those questions like, how big is my facility? Do I have the space to do what I want to do? Do I have enough equipment and the right kind of equipment? What's the capacity of my equipment? How many people do I have, and what's the capacity of my people? All those things help answer this overall question of utilization rate. So utilization is pretty simple. It's like, what's the best possible maximum output you can produce versus what you're currently doing? So let's say you can produce 100 units in a month. We'll pick that as an intermediate range. I can do 100 units in a month. That's the best I can do when everything's clicking well. I'm only producing 70 today, so I'd be 70% utilized for that 1 month time period. Economies of scale usually happens, like in the example here they give is a factory. So as a factory gets larger and larger, its volume increases, so the average cost goes down because you're spreading fixed cost over a larger number of units. However, there is a point when it gets so big, and that's the diseconomies of scale, that you can't manage it anymore. One of the companies that I worked for, we would build a plant no bigger than about 400 to 500 people. Because at that point, then it got so big that it was hard to manage, for at least in the organization that I was in.